How's it going, everybody? I'm Evo from the Lineman Lounge here again with another off-season outlook. And today we are going to be going over an NFC West grouping of teams. So it's the 2023-2024 season ending. It's time for most of the teams in the NFL and their fan base to start looking forward to the next season. Majority of the league has already started their de facto off seasons, and I figure it's a good opportunity for us to take a quick and concise look at every single franchise, where they're at heading into the off season, things like cap space, potential free agents, head coaching changes, stuff like that. So I did a lot of the legwork earlier on in the year, and compiled all this information for you, so that way you don't have to go into the off season just kind of blind, other than maybe knowing a little bit about your own team. Now you're going to be able to know everything about all these teams and not look like a fool to friends or people at work. But either way, we're going to be going over the NFC West in this video. So stand by and we will get right into it. All righty. So first up, LA Rams. They finished the year 10-7, and this is a team that I absolutely have to eat crow on. Uh, I did not expect the Rams to get to double-digit wins this year. I absolutely did not expect them to get past 5 wins this year, just based off of how deprived of talent this team is, specifically on defense. I mean, you still have Aaron Donald there, you have Matthew Stafford, and you have Cooper Cup. And then once we start moving beyond that, it's kind of tough to start naming names of players. But they ended up hitting on a lot of draft picks, and I think this just shows that Sean McVay is the guy. He is a really darn good coach. Him, Raheem Morris, now the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons, like they have a good crew out there. And we're able to do really good things this year. Offensively, PFF had them ranked as the 7th best offense. Defensively, they were 23rd. They still can definitely make improvements there. But they had a lot of guys, again, draft picks step up this year. One guy that I was a big fan of going into the draft was wide receiver Puka Nakua. And never in my wildest dreams would I have thought that he would have had the season that he had this year. It was outstanding. They hit on running back, they hit on defensive tackle. They did really well this year. And I think things are just going to continue to start to look up for the Rams. They originally had the F them picks mentality, and that worked out for them, got them to the Super Bowl. But now they are kind of in the normalization stage of fixing their cap, getting picks back, developing a young roster. And before you know it, they might be in another situation where, like, hey, we're competitive. F them picks again. Let's throw everything in the kitchen sink at it and try to go get another championship. So, as of right now, pending free agents for this team, you've got Carson Wentz at quarterback, cornerback Akila Witherspoon, and strong safety John Johnson. Those are guys that they could potentially look at bringing back. I mean, I don't know how Carson Wentz looks these days, but it's still an option. But with 24 million in adjusted effective cap space, they're not doing horrible. They're not having to fight their cap, and they have a young roster that they can work on, re-signing guys, building from. They have 6 total draft picks here, including the number 19 overall pick. So a little bit later in the first round, but still, like, they're not looking for their next quarterback yet. At least not someone to step in day one. That's someone, Matthew Stafford isn't getting any younger. They're going to need a new quarterback sooner or later. And they're a dark horse to kind of look at quarterbacks maybe in the later part of the first round or definitely in future rounds. And if you're looking for quarterbacks that are fringe first rounders or beyond, check out the Lyman Lounge. We are going to be doing episodes concerning all of these rookies. I've got a lot of notes already taken on these guys, watched a lot of film, a lot of video, a lot of cut ups from other YouTubers and analysts going over these quarterbacks and every other position in this draft. So it's going to be a lot of fun to get into that. And this is building up to be a really exciting draft. But yeah, there's a lot of Jags on defense still. Defense is one of the main spots that they need to focus their energy. Edge rusher, cornerback, defensive line. And then on the offensive side of the ball, they could use a retooling at tackle and interior offensive line. And then, like I said, quarterback definitely would be a smart place to go. But when you hit on guys like a Kyron Williams at running back, Puka Nakua at wide receiver, and then Kobe Turner at defensive tackle, who realistically should be looked at as a defensive rookie of the year candidate, like, it's going to boost your team up. Obviously, it boosted them up to double-digit wins this year. They're aren't set to lose too much talent on this team from expiring contracts. They have enough cap space to have a little bit of flexibility, sign one, maybe two contributors, and LA can. I mean, if they're able to nail this draft again, they're absolutely going to be in the hunt here, at least as potentially a wild card team in the NFC West. Next up, we have the San Francisco 49ers. Their season is not done yet. They are playing in the Super Bowl here in just a few days. They ended with a 12-5 record, had a little bit of a midseason slump, and that's what happens when you play teams like the Cleveland Browns and the Minnesota Vikings, who are way better than at least the Vikings record would suggest. Um, a little false positivity there. But offensively, they were the first ranked offense in the NFL. Defensively, they're the second ranked defense according to PFF. And this is a team that is capitalizing on having a young quarterback on a rookie deal with a star-studded roster around him. They still have some issues there, and going into next offseason, hopefully they'll be able to address some of that. It will be a little bit difficult, but if anyone can develop guys and find ways to figure out the cap, I do kind of trust John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan to be able to do that. They're in the middle of their window, and they're going to have that window open continually, I think, until Brock Purdy hits his contract year, when they actually have to extend him. That's when you set to start making some really really tough choices. But they don't have a lot of areas where they really really need improvement. Offensive tackle, I mean, you're not going to have your offensive tackles playing there forever. Um, they could use an upgrade there. Cornerback for sure. Those defensive backs, absolutely. Interior offensive line, maybe some more wide receiver help and help along the defensive line. They do have 6 draft picks. We don't know where they're picking in the first round yet because it'll either be 31 or 32 based on how they do in the Super Bowl. Pending free agents. Defensive end Randy Gregory, they traded for him this year. Defensive end Chase Young also traded for him. Quarterback Sam Darnold, backup quarterback. We'll see if he's necessary going forward. Defensive tackle Javon Kinlaw, free safety Shashawn Gibson, defensive tackle Sebastian Joseph, linebacker Oren Burks, defensive end Cleveland Farrell, center John Feliciano, wide receiver Ray McLeod, and wide receiver Juwan Jennings. So those are a lot of names, a lot of recognizable names because those are guys that are starting or contributing to this team right now. And the 49ers are currently 11.7 million over the cap expected based on effective and adjusted cap space for next offseason. They're going to have to make some moves in order to push contracts in the future and stuff like that while they're in their window. They will probably have to eat that several years down the line, but they are in this window right now. It is Super Bowl or bust for this team. They are easily, in my opinion, the best team in the NFC as of right now. Next year, if they're able to re-sign some of these guys and draft well, they should still absolutely be top 3 competitive within the NFC. It just all is going to center around who can they bring back, who can they restructure, and how can they move some of that money around with contracts. But for the 49ers, you are in your window. Go for it. Try to get the whole damn thing. Next up, we have the Arizona Cardinals, another team that I really did not expect much from this year. And if you look at their record, you think, yeah, they weren't a very good team. And then for what it's worth, they weren't a good team. 4-13, not going good. Jonathan Gannon was a hire that I hated. I'm not willing to send them to eat crow yet, but they were a feisty, competitive team this year. This is a Cardinals team that was able to go out and get wins against the Cowboys and the Eagles and stay competitive with a lot of teams. Um, Kyler Murray, he is staying put. I don't expect them to move on from him. You asked me 6 months ago what's happening with Kyler Murray, and if you watched our Lineman Lounge episodes, you'd hear me parrot a lot that he's going to be traded to the Denver Broncos and be Sean Payton's new quarterback. Well, that's not happening. Kyler is staying. They've got their guy right now. Hopefully, he stays off the Call of Duty and continues to look good because second half of this year when he was out there playing, recovering from or coming back from his injury, he looked all right. Like he looked pretty good. I still don't necessarily trust Jonathan Gannon and that coaching staff. Hopefully, they fix their facilities because they were the worst rated team from a player perspective this last offseason. But there are some reasons to be hopeful if you're a Cardinals fan. I know a lot of Cardinals fans were probably hoping to have that top pick overall and get themselves a Caleb Williams this year. But Kyler, I mean, he looks all right. Maybe getting away from Cliff Kingsbury, who's up in Washington now, and a better system fit for him. Maybe that's going to work out better in the long run. Offensively, they were the 26th ranked offense. Defensively, they were the dead last worst defense in the league, according to PFF. But I don't think those rankings tell the true story. They do have a bunch of young players that are promising. They hit on Michael Wilson, wide receiver from Stanford this year. He dropped a little bit in the draft because of injury concerns, but I mean, every time he played there, he was good. And then for the Cardinals, obviously, he was a boon this year. And then tight end Trey McBride really showed out this year. And they had an okay year from rookie BJ Ojulari as well on the defensive side. Dennis Gardeck, defensive player for him. He's a good story, good compliment, along with Zaven Collins. But they need to look for more defenders overall. I mean, when you're the worst defense in the league and your head coach is a defensive head coach, they need to focus on that defense for sure. The running back room does seem to be set or one of the more stable rooms on the team, and they have a decent amount of cap to work with to try to build this roster up. Uh, 30.9 million in the positive, so that's plenty to work with. And the only real big name pending free agents that they have are wide receiver Hollywood, Marquise Hollywood Brown, and safety Buda Baker, who actually has a club option. The club can just elect to extend his contract without him saying yes or no, based on a restructure from last year. So I expect Buda Baker to be back unless they really want to try to sign, trade, or move him or save a little bit more money. But he's a good safety, and you don't have a lot on defense, so you might as well keep him there in house. Um, as far as the draft, they have the fourth overall pick and 11 picks total. Um, they're going to have a shot at one of those top end wide receivers. If you look at a lot of draft projections right now, you're not seeing a defensive player taken until usually around pick 9 or so with the Falcons. And it's not because there isn't good defenders, but it's just because there's so much promising offensive talent at the top of this draft. I would expect them to either look at wide receiver, which Marvin Harrison Jr. absolutely is in play at pick number 4. And in many other years, he's the top player in the draft. By most metrics, he is the number 1 rated player in this draft. And he could fall to pick 4 because quarterbacks are so important. If you have an opportunity to get him, you got to go for it. They could also potentially trade down because this roster does have a lot of holes. That's why they have 11 total picks this year because they did some wheeling and dealing last year with Monty Austin coming in as a new GM. They could look to do the same this year, move a little bit further down in the first round, pick up some extra picks for this year and next year, and still get one of the top 3 receivers in this draft, which Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Rome Odunze, each in their own respect, are number 1 receivers. They are top receivers in different drafts. Each of them probably warrants a top 5 pick, absolutely a top 10 pick. So if you're able to trade down a little bit, walk away with one of those guys, that's a good steal. Otherwise, offensive tackle. This is a tackle laden draft. They need tackle help. They need offensive line help. Either of those positions would be smart. I know I just said that they need a lot of defense. Well, they can focus on defense with most of their other picks. But when you're picking there in the top 5 offensive players, that's where you want to go in this draft. So things are kind of looking up for the Cardinals. Again, I am still out on Jonathan Gannon. I thought he was the Manchurian candidate coach to be brought in, that it was going to be a one and done year for him. But the way that they played, the scrappiness that they had, some things are looking up for them, especially because they had a pretty decent draft this last year. So expect for them to try to hit on more draft picks, and they might be able to make 1 or 2 splashy moves this offseason free agency as well. Get a little bit better. I wouldn't expect them to get up to double digits as far as wins or anything because this NFC West is pretty difficult to play in. But they're still a team to watch and see what they're going to do, especially if they get a Marvin Harrison Jr. out there. I mean, that'd be amazing for them. All right, and lastly, we have the Seattle Seahawks. So the Seahawks move on from Pete Carroll in a surprise, a move that I personally don't know why you would do at this point. Um, he says he still wants to coach. I mean, I know he's old, but he looks like he's early 60s, late 50s with how he's jumping around on the sideline, chomping that gum. but they're trying to move him into more of an advisory role, and in getting rid of Pete Carroll, basically ushering him out, they also lost offensive coordinator Shane Waldron over to the Bears. And that's a big loss for that offense too. Um, the expectation was that Dan Quinn would go up there. Obviously, that didn't happen. Dan Quinn ended up going to Washington. And I think that Seattle actually ended up with a better option in Mike McDonald, the defensive coordinator from the Ravens. McDonald was previously a defensive coach at Michigan, really good there. And then he did great things with this Ravens defense this year and earned himself that head coaching gig up there in Seattle. Most teams like to focus on getting offensive coaches these days, though, because offenses like that is the bread and butter of most NFL teams and focusing on quarterback and things like that. Well, as of right now, the Seahawks have their quarterback, kind of. They've got, I mean, an aging Geno Smith who 2 years ago, really showed out and looked really good. And then this year just kind of fell back to earth, but not to what he was before. He's still an average to above average quarterback on a relatively cheap deal, but they are in a position where if they really want to rip this team down to the studs, really want to have like a reset, or maybe even not rip it down completely, but understand that like, hey, new head coach, new regime kind of situation. Let's take a reset year. We're going to take our lumps with this, or we're going to try to rebuild this roster. This wouldn't be a terrible year to do that, and they could get away with trading Geno Smith to a quarterback needy team to build for future draft capital and go after a quarterback that way. Because as of right now, they have the 16th overall pick. They're not in a great position to take a quarterback in the first round, and we don't really know what sort of an offense they're going to have up there right now. They finished the year 9-8, so a solid and respectable record with the 11th ranked offense and 14th ranked defense, both average to above average in their own respect. But you can kind of see that the leash is going to be short with Geno Smith. The potential there with Geno Smith is going to be limited to an extent. And they do have some really strong offensive players that they can continue to build around, especially if they're able to find a quarterback of the future. Can they find it this year? Maybe in the later rounds if they find a guy to develop, but more than likely, I feel like it's going to be a next season type of thing. And more than likely, they just roll with Geno Smith and take their lumps. Now, the problem here for the Seahawks, they are 9.5 million over the cap when it's adjusted for effective cap space, and they do have a decent amount of players that I would look at bringing back on this team to at least maintain what we did the previous season. Defensive tackle Leonard Williams. They traded for him from New York this year. He's a solid, good defensive tackle. He is due for a new contract, and is absolutely something they need to bring back. Linebacker Bobby Wagner. He was with Seattle, went to the Rams, and now is back with Seattle, but his contract is up. He is aging. He is not what he once was. It'll be tough with Seattle fans probably to say goodbye to Bobby, but it might be the right time. Quarterback Drew Lock, the primary backup. If you move on from Geno, you kind of got to bring Drew Lock back because you don't have many other options. Drew Lock is at this point an average backup quarterback, in my opinion. Guard Phil Hayes, linebacker Devin Bush, tight end Noah Fant, who was part of that Russell Wilson trade. It would probably hurt to lose him. It'll be interesting to see if they decide to bring him back or not. Linebacker Jordan Brooks, who was awesome at linebacker, he really took over for Bobby Wagner, but he has struggled with some injuries. So I would expect them to try to bring him back, but I could see because of the injury concerns letting him walk. And then guards Evan Brown and Damian Lewis. They do need some interior offensive line help. They need edge rush help, defensive line, quarterback for the future, offensive tackle, interior offensive line, linebacker. They need a bunch of different things. And a sneaky pick that's kind of gaining steam for them in the first round is a guy like Jackson Powers Johnson out of Oregon. He's a center. He is one of the best center prospects that we've seen in a bit. He looked fantastic at the Senior Bowl, and he has versatility. He's played guard up at Oregon before and been a top end guard. And then he was easily the best center in the nation in college football this year, and continues to look the part in the Senior Bowl. So, how do the Seahawks get positive in the cap space? Well, certain guys like Jamal Adams, who has kind of hinted at retirement a little bit, but if that doesn't happen, they could be looking to move on from him. They could look to try to extend Leonard Williams, but backload a lot of that money. That's really not going to help them this year with their cap space, but it's not going to impact them negatively on their cap space this year. And then they need to start looking at guys like DK Metcalf. He has been talked about as a potential trade option for them, especially after last year taking JSN, Jackson Smith and Jigba from Ohio State. Um, but I feel like they will probably try to just restructure, resign, extend his contract somehow to push more money off into the future and get them a little bit better on the cap this year. Um, yeah, it's a team that I think could use for an active reset. Trying to think of what the term that the Vikings use, a competitive reset where they're not completely tearing everything down to the studs, but they are trying to get their books right and have more of a youth focus. That would be smart for the Seahawks team going forward because, in my opinion, if you don't move on from Geno Smith this year, it's probably his last year where he's really competitive in this league, and you're really going to have to start looking at that quarterback situation regardless. But either way, that is our short overview of the NFC West. Hopefully, you enjoyed it. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel for both Mike and I and the Lyman Lounge, and then leave some comments below. Let me know how you think I'm doing on these outlooks. Let me know your thoughts on any of these teams, any teams that I've gone over or will be going over. Let me know your thoughts on what you would do if you were in the positions of those GMs and head coaches. And until the next time, I'll see you later.